Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales and boundless imagination come to life. Enjoy the story and don't forget to subscribe.
After a storm, held a quiet intelligence. He wore simple, functional clothing, a faded blue shirt, sturdy trousers, and a wide-brimmed hat to shield him from the relentless suns. The rhythmic drone of the harvester was suddenly interrupted by a sharp, metallic screech. Ethan slammed on the brakes, dust billowing around the machine. He cursed under his breath. Mechanical failures were common on Kepler 186f, spare parts were expensive and hard to come by. He hopped down from the harvester, his boots sinking slightly into the parched earth. He scanned the field, expecting to find a broken drive belt or a clogged filter. But then he saw it, a glint of silver in the distance, nestled in a shallow gully beyond the wheat fields. It was something that definitely didn't belong on his farm. Curiosity overriding his apprehension, Ethan started walking towards the object. The closer he got, the clearer it became. It was a spacecraft, or what was left of one. It was small, sleek, and undeniably alien, its hull scarred and blackened, a testament to a violent descent. Smoke still curled from a gash in its side. Ethan approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He had heard stories of alien encounters, whispers of advanced civilizations and interstellar wars, but he had always dismissed them as tall tales, campfire fantasies. Now, standing before this wrecked vessel, he realized that those stories were more than just fiction. He peered into the gaping hole in the spacecraft's hull. The interior was dimly lit, flickering consoles and sparking wires casting eerie shadows. A strange, acrid smell filled the air. "Hello?" Ethan called out, his voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" A weak groan answered him. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then climbed into the wreckage. Inside, he found a figure slumped against a twisted console. It was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her skin was a pale lavender, her hair a cascade of shimmering silver threads. Large, violet eyes, filled with pain and fear, stared up at him. She wore a strange, form-fitting suit of metallic fabric, torn and singed in several places. "Please," she whispered, her voice raspy and weak, "you must help me." Her words were translated instantly by a small device on her wrist, the universal translator working perfectly. Ethan, despite his initial shock, reacted instinctively. He was a farmer, a caretaker, used to tending to the needs of living things. He couldn't just leave her to die. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "My ship attacked," she gasped. "I managed to escape, but..." She clutched at her side, wincing in pain. "I'll get you out of here," Ethan said, gently lifting her. She was surprisingly light. He carried her out of the wreckage and laid her down on the cool earth beneath the shade of the spacecraft. "Who are you?" he asked. "My name is Lyra," she said. "I am a princess." Ethan stared at her, incredulous. A princess? On his farm? It was all too surreal. "I need shelter," Lyra continued, her voice urgent. "They will be looking for me." "Who will?" "Regent Forlag," she said, her voice laced with venom. "My uncle. He wants me dead." Ethan didn't understand any of this, but he could see the fear in her eyes. He knew enough to know that she was in danger. "I can't take you to town," he said. "They'll ask too many questions. But I have a farm, a ways from here. It's not much, but it's safe." Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes searching his face. "And you would risk helping me? A stranger?" Ethan shrugged. "I can't just leave you here to die." "I have nothing to offer you in return," Lyra said, her voice filled with despair. "My ship is destroyed, my resources gone." She fumbled with something on her wrist, a small, intricate device that looked like a piece of jewelry. It was made of a dark, obsidian-like material, etched with glowing symbols. "Take this," she said, offering it to him. "It is all I have left. It may be valuable someday." Ethan hesitated. He didn't want her trinket. He was helping her because it was the right thing to do, not for any reward. But he could see that it was important to her, a symbol of something she had lost. He took the device. It felt cool and smooth in his hand, humming with a faint energy. He couldn't understand its purpose, but he knew that it meant something to her. "Thank you," Lyra said, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Ethan helped her to her feet, supporting her as they walked towards his farm. The suns were beginning to set, casting long shadows across the fields. He knew that by helping her, he was stepping into a world of danger and intrigue, a world far beyond the familiar boundaries of his farm. But as he looked at Lyra, at the desperation in her eyes, he knew that he had made the right decision. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that his life would never be the same. He was just a farm boy, but he was about to become something more. He was about to become Lyra's protector, her only hope in a hostile universe. And he wouldn't let her down. The walk to the farm was slow and arduous. Lyra was weak and in pain, and Ethan had to stop frequently to let her rest. As they walked, she told him more about herself, about her home planet, about the tyrannical regent Forlag who had usurped the throne. Her story was incredible, filled with tales of political intrigue, technological marvels, and interstellar conflict. Ethan listened intently, his mind struggling to comprehend the vastness and complexity of the universe beyond his own small world. He learned that Lyra was the rightful heir to the throne of the Zidonian Empire, a vast and powerful civilization spanning dozens of star systems. Forlag, her uncle, had seized power through treachery and violence, assassinating her parents and declaring himself regent until Lyra came of age. But Forlag had no intention of relinquishing the throne. He wanted Lyra dead, and he had sent assassins after her. Lyra had managed to escape, fleeing in a small scout ship, hoping to reach a hidden rebel base in a remote sector of the galaxy. But her ship had been ambushed, and she had been forced to crash land on Kepler 186f. Ethan's farm was a simple, two-story structure built of local stone and timber. It wasn't much, but it was sturdy and functional. He lived there with his grandfather, Old Man Tiber, a grizzled veteran of past planetary conflicts. As they approached the farm, Ethan felt a surge of anxiety. He didn't know how Tiber would react to Lyra. His grandfather was a cautious and pragmatic man, wary of strangers and quick to suspect the worst. He led Lyra inside and helped her to a chair in the small living room. The room was sparsely furnished, with a rough-hewn table, a few chairs, and a crackling fireplace. The walls were adorned with faded photographs of Ethan's family, generations of farmers who had eked out a living on this harsh planet. Tiber emerged from the kitchen, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. He was a tall, imposing figure, even in his old age. His face was etched with wrinkles, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He carried a battered rifle in his hand. "Who's this?" he growled, his gaze fixed on Lyra. "Grandpa, this is Lyra," Ethan said nervously. She needs our help." Tiber scrutinized Lyra, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "She looks like trouble to me." "She's a princess," Ethan blurted out. "From another planet." Tiber snorted. "A princess? And I'm the Emperor of Kepler, 186f. What's really going on, Ethan?" Ethan explained everything, telling Tiber about the crashed spacecraft, about Lyra's escape from Forlag, and about the danger she was in. Tiber listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Ethan finished, he lowered his rifle and sighed. "I've seen a lot of strange things in my life," he said. "But this takes the cake." He looked at Lyra, his eyes softening slightly. "All right, princess," he said. "You can stay here for now. But you'll have to earn your keep. We don't have room for freeloaders." Lyra nodded gratefully. "I will do whatever I can to help," she said. Tiber turned to Ethan. Get her settled in the spare room, he said. And then come help me with the chores. We have a lot of work to do. Ethan smiled. He knew that Tiber's gruff exterior hid a kind heart. He was relieved that his grandfather had agreed to help Lyra. He led Lyra to the spare room, a small, simple chamber with a bed, a table, and a window overlooking the fields. This is it, he said. It's not much, but it's private. It's perfect, Lyra said, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you both. Ethan left her to rest and went to help Tiber with the chores. As he milked the cows and fed the chickens, he couldn't help but wonder what the future held. He was just a farm boy, but he was now caught up in a galactic conflict, a war between a princess and a tyrant. He didn't know what role he would play in this drama, but he knew that he would do everything in his power to protect Lyra. He had given her his word, and he would never break it. The fate of a princess, and perhaps an entire empire, now rested on his shoulders. And he was ready to carry that burden. The rough-spun blanket scratched against Lyra's lavender skin, a stark contrast to the silken fabrics she was accustomed to. The spare room in Ethan's farmhouse was simple, almost Spartan, but it was safe. And after days of running, of hiding, of fearing for her life, safety was a luxury she hadn't dared to dream of. She lay on the bed, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling, the scent of dust and dried grain filling her nostrils. It was a far cry from the opulent palaces of Zidon Prime, the capital world of the Zidonian Empire. She remembered the vast, sun-drenched gardens, the crystal fountains, the soaring spires that pierced the clouds. She remembered her parents, their warmth, their wisdom, their unwavering love. A sharp pang of grief pierced her heart, a familiar ache that had become her constant companion since their assassination. Regent Forlag had seen to that. He had stolen everything from her, her family, her throne, her future. Lyra closed her eyes, trying to block out the memories, but they came flooding back, relentless and unforgiving. She saw her father, the Emperor Valerius, a strong and just ruler, his face etched with the weight of his responsibilities. She saw her mother, Empress Anya, her beauty radiant, her spirit indomitable. They had been everything to her, her mentors, her protectors, her guiding stars. And then she saw Forlag, his eyes cold and calculating, his smile a mask of deceit. He had always been jealous of her father, resentful of his power. He had craved the throne, and he had been willing to do anything to seize it. The coup had been swift and brutal. Forlag had used his position as head of the Imperial Guard to orchestrate a coordinated attack on the palace. Loyal soldiers had been betrayed, innocent civilians slaughtered. Lyra had witnessed the carnage firsthand, the screams, the explosions, the rivers of blood. Her parents had died protecting her, sacrificing themselves to give her a chance to escape. She would never forget their final words, their pleas for her to survive, to reclaim her birthright, to avenge their deaths. She had fled in a small scout ship, guided by a coded message from a loyalist within the Imperial Senate. The message directed her to a hidden rebel base in the Outer Rim, where she could rally support and plan her counteroffensive. But Forlag's forces had been waiting for her. Her ship had been ambushed, crippled by enemy fire. She had managed to escape in an escape pod, crash-landing on this remote, insignificant planet. Kepler 186f. It was a world of dust and starlight, a forgotten corner of the galaxy. And yet, it had become her sanctuary, her refuge from the storm. She thought of Ethan, the young farm boy who had rescued her from the wreckage of her ship. He was an unlikely savior, a simple, unassuming man with calloused hands and a kind heart. He knew nothing of galactic politics, of interstellar wars, of the burdens of leadership. And yet, he had risked his life to help her, a complete stranger. She didn't understand why. What could possibly motivate him to offer shelter to an alien princess, a fugitive hunted by a ruthless tyrant? Was it compassion? Was it naivete? Or was it something else, something she couldn't quite grasp? She glanced at the device she had given him, the small, obsidian-like object that now rested on the table beside her bed. It was a keystone, a key to unlocking a network of ancient technologies hidden throughout the Zidonian Empire. These technologies, created by a long-lost civilization, held the power to turn the tide of the war against Forlag. Her parents had entrusted her with the keystone, knowing that it was the only hope for the future of the Empire. They had warned her that Forlag would stop at nothing to obtain it. It was the reason he wanted her dead. She had offered it to Ethan as payment for his help, but in truth, it was a test. She needed to know if she could trust him, if he was worthy of the responsibility that lay ahead. She had seen something in his eyes, a spark of courage, a flicker of defiance. He was not a soldier, not a politician, not a leader. But he was honest, he was loyal, and he was willing to stand up for what he believed in. Perhaps, she thought, he was exactly what she needed. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Ethan entered the room, his face etched with concern. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," Lyra said, sitting up in bed. "Thank you." "Tiber made some soup," Ethan said. "He said it'll help you heal." Lyra smiled. "Your grandfather is formidable. He's got a good heart," Ethan said. "Just take some getting used to." He handed her a bowl of steaming broth. The aroma was simple but comforting. "So," Ethan said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "What happens now?" Lyra sighed. "Now, I plan my next move. I need to reach the rebel base, rally support, and challenge Forlag's claim to the throne." "That sounds complicated," Ethan said. "It is," Lyra said. "Forlag controls the military, the media, the entire government. He has spies everywhere. I can trust no one. Except us?" Ethan asked. Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes filled with gratitude. "Except you," she said. "You and Tiber. You are my only allies." "Then we'll help you," Ethan said. "We'll do whatever we can." Lyra shook her head. "You don't understand the danger you're in. Forlag is ruthless. He will stop at nothing to get to me. He will destroy this planet if he has to. Then we'll be ready for him," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We're not afraid of a fight." Lyra was taken aback by his resolve. He was just a farm boy, but he spoke with the conviction of a seasoned warrior. "I need to tell you about the keystone," she said. "The device I gave you. It's more than just a trinket. It's the key to unlocking a network of ancient technologies that could change the course of the war." Ethan listened intently as Lyra explained the history of the keystone, its origins in a long-lost civilization, its potential to unleash unimaginable power. "These technologies could give us the edge we need to defeat Forlag," she said. "But they are scattered throughout the Empire, hidden in ancient ruins, guarded by forgotten traps. We need to find them, activate them, and use them to our advantage." "How do we do that?" Ethan asked. "The keystone will guide us," Lyra said. "It will lead us to the locations of the hidden technologies. But it will not be easy. Forlag knows about the keystone. He will be searching for it. He will be searching for me. Then we need to protect it," Ethan said. "We need to protect you." Lyra nodded. "We need to be careful. We need to be smart. We need to be ready for anything." She looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with determination. The fate of her empire, the lives of her people, rested on their shoulders. It was a heavy burden, but she knew that they could carry it together. "We are not just fighting for my throne," she said. "We are fighting for freedom, for justice, for hope. We are fighting for a better future for the entire galaxy." Ethan stood up, his eyes shining with purpose. "Then let's get to work," he said. Lyra smiled. She was still a princess, still a fugitive, still hunted by a ruthless tyrant. But she was no longer alone. She had found allies in the most unlikely of places, on a forgotten planet in the Outer Rim. And with their help, she was ready to fight back. The whispers of the Empire were beginning to stir, and the seeds of rebellion had been sown. The fight for the throne, the fight for the future, was about to begin. And Lyra, the exiled princess, was ready to lead the charge. The acrid smell of ozone and burnt metal still clung to Jax's nostrils as he surveyed the wreckage. The scout ship was a write-off, its hull twisted and blackened, its internal systems fried beyond repair. It was a sloppy job, an amateur's attempt at evasion. But it had served its purpose, it had led him here. Jax was a bounty hunter, a tracker of men and aliens, a predator in the cold vacuum of space. He was a man of few words and even fewer scruples. He lived by a simple code: get the job done, get paid, survive. He had no loyalty to anyone, no allegiance to any cause. He was a mercenary, a tool for those who could afford his services. And Regent Forlag could afford the best. He was tall and lean, with a wiry strength honed by years of combat and survival. His face was scarred and weathered, his eyes a cold, piercing gray. He wore a dark, functional bodysuit, reinforced with ceramic plating, and a utility belt bristling with weapons and tools. His rifle, a modified pulse carbine, was slung across his back, always within easy reach. Forlag had tasked him with finding Lyra, the exiled princess. He wanted her dead, her body delivered as proof of her demise. The reward was substantial, enough to set Jax up for life. But it wasn't just the money that motivated him. There was something about this hunt, something about Lyra, that intrigued him. She was a princess, a symbol of hope for a crumbling empire. Forlag saw her as a threat, a rival to his power. But Jax saw her as a challenge, a test of his skills. He wanted to see if she was as clever, as resourceful as the rumors suggested. He wanted to see if she was worthy of the price on her head. He activated his wrist-mounted scanner, analyzing the wreckage for any trace of Lyra. The scanner beeped, indicating a faint energy signature, a residual trace of her escape pod. He followed the signal, his boots crunching on the parched earth. The signal led him to a small village, a collection of ramshackle buildings huddled together for protection against the harsh elements. It was a backwater settlement, populated by farmers and miners, the kind of people who scraped out a living on the fringes of civilization. Jax approached the village cautiously, his senses on high alert. He knew that Lyra could be hiding anywhere, disguised as a local, waiting for an opportunity to escape. He entered the village, his presence immediately drawing attention. The villagers stopped what they were doing, their eyes fixed on him with a mixture of fear and suspicion. "I'm looking for someone," Jax said, his voice cold and emotionless. "A woman. Lavender skin, silver hair. She arrived here recently in an escape pod." The villagers remained silent, their faces blank. They knew better than to cooperate with strangers. They had learned long ago that silence was the best defense against unwanted attention. Jax sighed. He had expected this. He was good at extracting information, but it often required a more persuasive approach. He grabbed a nearby villager, a scrawny man with a nervous twitch. "I'm not asking," Jax said, his grip tightening on the man's arm. "I'm telling. Where is she?" The villager stammered, his eyes wide with terror. I don't know what you're talking about." Jax slammed the villager against a nearby wall, his pulse carbine pointed at his head. "Don't lie to me," he growled. "I know she's here. Tell me where she is, or I'll start killing everyone in this village." The villager burst into tears, his body trembling. Okay, he sobbed. "I'll tell you. She's with the farm boy. Ethan. He lives on a farm a few miles from here." Jax released the villager, his expression unchanged. "Ethan," he said, repeating the name in his mind. "Take me to him." The villager led Jax out of the village and towards the farm. As they walked, Jax questioned him about Ethan, about Lyra, about anything that might give him an advantage. He learned that Ethan was a simple farmer, a hard-working young man who had never left this planet. He had a grandfather, an old man named Tiber, a veteran of past planetary conflicts. And he learned that Lyra had been injured in the crash, but she was recovering. She was staying at Ethan's farm, hiding from Forlag's forces. Jax smiled. It was all falling into place. He was closing in on his prey. As they approached the farm, Jax could see it in the distance, a small, isolated structure nestled in the fields. He ordered the villager to stop. "Wait here," he said. "And don't try anything stupid. If you do, I'll kill you." He advanced towards the farm alone, his senses on high alert. He knew that Ethan and Tiber would be expecting him. They would be prepared for a fight. But Jax was not afraid. He had faced far worse odds in his life. He was a hunter, a survivor. He was the shadow on the horizon, the harbinger of death. He reached the farm and stopped, surveying the scene. The farm was quiet, but he could sense the tension in the air. He knew that they were watching him, waiting for him to make a move. "Ethan," Jax called out, his voice echoing across the fields. "I know she's here. I know you're hiding her. Come out now, and maybe I'll let you live." There was no response. Jax sighed. He had given them a chance. Now, he would have to do things the hard way. He raised his pulse carbine and fired a shot into the air. The shot echoed across the fields, shattering the silence. "This is your last chance," Jax shouted. "Come out now, or I'll burn this place to the ground." Still, there was no response. Jax lowered his rifle and advanced towards the farm, his eyes scanning the windows, the doors, the shadows. He was ready for anything. He reached the front door and kicked it open, shattering the wood. He stepped inside, his pulse carbine raised and ready to fire. The house was empty. Jax cursed under his breath. They had anticipated him. They had fled. He searched the house, ransacking every room, looking for any clue to their whereabouts. He found nothing. He went outside and surveyed the surrounding fields. He could see tracks in the dirt, leading away from the farm. They had escaped into the wilderness. Jax smiled. The hunt was on. He followed the tracks, his senses on high alert. He knew that Ethan and Tiber would be trying to lead him into a trap. But he was too experienced to fall for their tricks. He tracked them for hours, across fields, through forests, over hills. He was relentless, tireless. He would not give up until he had found them. As darkness fell, he reached a small clearing in the woods. He could see a campfire in the distance, the flames flickering in the night. He approached the campfire cautiously, his pulse carbine raised and ready to fire. He could see Ethan and Tiber sitting around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flames. And he could see Lyra, sitting between them, her violet eyes fixed on him. Jax stopped, his expression unchanged. He had found them. The hunt was over. "It's over, Princess," he said, his voice cold and emotionless. "There's nowhere left to run." Ethan stood up, his eyes filled with defiance. "Leave her alone," he said. "She hasn't done anything to you." Jax laughed. "That's not for you to decide. I have a job to do. And I always finish what I start." He raised his pulse carbine, aiming it at Lyra's head. "Any last words, Princess?" he asked. Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and defiance. "You will not win," she said. "My people will never surrender." Jax smiled. "We'll see about that," he said. He squeezed the trigger. But before he could fire, a shot rang out from the darkness. The shot struck Jax in the shoulder, sending him stumbling backwards. He spun around, his pulse carbine raised and ready to fire. He could see Tiber standing in the shadows, his rifle smoking. The fight had begun. And Jax knew that it would be a fight to the death. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. But he was not afraid. He was a hunter, a survivor. He was the shadow on the horizon, and he would not go down without a fight. He would take them all with him. The crack of Jax's pulse rifle echoed in Tiber's ears, a stark reminder of the countless battles he'd fought, the friends he'd lost. He'd hoped those days were behind him, that he could live out his remaining years in peace, tending to the farm with Ethan. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Tiber was a relic of a bygone era, a veteran of the Unification Wars, a series of brutal conflicts that had shaped the political landscape of Kepler 186F. He had seen the horrors of war firsthand, the senseless violence, the devastating losses. He had learned to fight, to survive, to kill when necessary. But he had also learned the value of peace, the importance of community, the enduring strength of the human spirit. He was old now, his body worn and scarred, his movements slower and more deliberate. But his mind was still sharp, his instincts still keen. He knew danger when he saw it, and he knew that Jax was a threat unlike any he had faced in a long time. The bounty hunter was a professional, a killer, a man without conscience. He was relentless, ruthless, and incredibly dangerous. Tiber knew that if they wanted to survive, they would have to fight him. He had watched Ethan grow from a boy into a man, teaching him the skills he would need to survive on this harsh planet, how to farm, how to hunt, how to defend himself. He had tried to shield him from the violence of the outside world, to protect his innocence. But now, Ethan was thrust into a conflict far beyond his understanding, a war between a princess and a tyrant. Tiber felt a pang of guilt. He had failed to protect Ethan from the darkness. But he would not fail him now. He would do everything in his power to keep him safe, to help him navigate this dangerous new world. He had initially been skeptical of Lyra, of her claims of royalty and interstellar intrigue. He had seen too many con artists and grifters in his time to trust anyone at face value. But he had also seen the fear in her eyes, the desperation in her voice. And he had recognized the truth in her story. She was a princess, yes, but she was also a refugee, a victim of political violence. She was vulnerable, scared, and in need of help. And Tiber, despite his initial reservations, couldn't turn his back on her. It wasn't in his nature. He had listened to her story, about Regent Forlag, about the Keystone, about the ancient technologies hidden throughout the Zidonian Empire. He had dismissed most of it as fanciful nonsense, the stuff of holovids and campfire tales. But then he had seen the Keystone, the small, obsidian-like device that Lyra had given to Ethan. He had felt the energy emanating from it, the faint hum of ancient power. He didn't understand how it worked, but he knew that it was something extraordinary. Something that could change everything. He had spent the last few hours preparing for Jax's arrival, gathering what weapons and supplies they had, fortifying the farm as best he could. He knew that it wouldn't be enough to stop a professional like Jax, but it would buy them some time, give them a fighting chance. He had also contacted the other farmers and miners in the area, sending out a coded message via their old comm system, warning them of the danger, asking for their help. He knew that most of them would be reluctant to get involved. They were simple people, used to a quiet life, wary of outsiders. But he also knew that they were fiercely independent, deeply loyal to their community. And he hoped that they would rally to his call. Now, as he stood in the shadows, his rifle trained on Jax, he could hear the sounds of movement in the distance. The other farmers and miners were arriving, answering his call for help. They were armed with whatever they could find, hunting rifles, mining tools, even pitchforks and shovels. They were not soldiers, not warriors. But they were determined to defend their homes, their families, their way of life. They were the seeds of rebellion, the spark that could ignite a revolution. Tiber fired his rifle, hitting Jax in the shoulder. It was a lucky shot, but it bought them some time. Jax stumbled backwards, giving Ethan and Lyra a chance to escape. "Get out of here!" Tiber shouted at them. "Go! I'll hold him off." Ethan hesitated, his eyes filled with concern. "I'm not leaving you, Grandpa. You have to," Tiber said. "She needs you. Get her to safety." "That's an order." Ethan nodded, his face grim. He grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her away, disappearing into the darkness. Tiber turned his attention back to Jax, who was now recovering from his wound. The bounty hunter glared at him, his eyes filled with rage. "You shouldn't have done that, old man," Jax said, his voice dripping with menace. "Now, you're going to pay." He raised his pulse carbine, aiming it at Tiber's head. Tiber braced himself for the impact, knowing that this could be the end. But he was not afraid. He had lived a long and full life. He had fought for what he believed in. And he was ready to face his death with courage and dignity. But then, before Jax could fire, a hail of gunfire erupted from the surrounding woods. The other farmers and miners had arrived, opening fire on the bounty hunter. Jax was caught off guard, forced to take cover behind a nearby tree. The farmers and miners continued to fire, their bullets whizzing past his head. Tiber seized the opportunity, rushing forward, his rifle blazing. He fired several shots at Jax, forcing him to duck for cover again. The battle raged on, the air filled with the sounds of gunfire, explosions, and shouting. The farmers and miners, despite their lack of training, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. They were defending their homes, their families, their way of life. And they were not going to back down. Tiber fought alongside them, his old bones aching, his lungs burning. But he refused to give up. He had a duty to protect Ethan, to protect Lyra, to protect his community. And he would fight to the death to fulfill that duty. As the battle reached its climax, Tiber saw something in the sky, a faint glimmer of light. He squinted, trying to make out what it was. And then he realized, it was a ship, descending from the heavens. It was sleek and powerful, unlike anything he had ever seen before. And it was heading straight for the farm. Tiber didn't know who was on board the ship, or what their intentions were. But he knew that their arrival could change everything. The seeds of rebellion had been sown. And now, it was time to see if they would grow. Ethan scrambled through the undergrowth, Lyra stumbling behind him. The sounds of gunfire echoed in the distance, a constant reminder of the danger they were in. He could hear Tiber's shouts, the roar of Jax's pulse rifle, the desperate cries of the farmers and miners. Each sound was a hammer blow to his heart. He hated leaving Tiber behind, but he knew that it was the right thing to do. Lyra was the priority. She was the key to saving her people, the hope for a galaxy oppressed by Forlag's tyranny. He had to get her to safety. He had never thought of himself as a leader, a warrior, or a hero. He was just a farm boy, content with his simple life. But now, thrust into this extraordinary situation, he felt a sense of responsibility he had never known before. He had made a promise to Lyra, to protect her, to help her reclaim her throne. And he would not break that promise, no matter the cost. He led Lyra through the forest, towards a hidden cave that Tiber had shown him years ago. It was a secret place, a refuge from the storms that occasionally swept across Kepler, 186F. It was small and cramped, but it was defensible. And it was the best chance they had of surviving the night. As they reached the cave, Ethan could see the fear in Lyra's eyes. She was a princess, accustomed to luxury and comfort. She was not used to running, to hiding, to living in squalor. But she had not complained once. She had shown a resilience and a determination that amazed him. "We'll be safe here," Ethan said, trying to reassure her. "At least for a while." Lyra nodded, her expression grim. "What about your grandfather? What about the others?" Ethan sighed. "I don't know," he said. But we have to trust that they can handle themselves. We have to focus on what we can do. He led Lyra into the cave and started a small fire, using some dried leaves and twigs he had gathered along the way. The fire provided a small amount of light and warmth, but it also made them more visible. He knew that Jax could find them if he tried hard enough. "What do we do now?" Ethan asked. "How do we stop him?" Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes filled with determination. "We fight," she said. "We use the keystone." Ethan looked at the keystone, the small, obsidian-like device that Lyra had given him. He still didn't understand how it worked, but he knew that it was their only hope. "How do we use it?" he asked. "I'm not sure," Lyra said. "I only know that it can unlock ancient technologies, powerful weapons that can help us defeat Forlag." She took the keystone from Ethan and held it in her hand, closing her eyes. She began to chant in a strange language, her voice echoing in the small cave. The keystone began to glow, emitting a faint pulse of energy. Ethan watched in amazement as the symbols on the keystone began to shift and change, forming new patterns, new configurations. He could feel the energy emanating from the device, a tangible force that vibrated through his entire body. Suddenly, Lyra gasped, her eyes snapping open. "I know where to go," she said. "There's an ancient facility, not far from here. It's hidden beneath the surface of the planet. The keystone can unlock it." Ethan nodded. "Then let's go," he said. They left the cave and started towards the location Lyra had described. As they walked, Ethan could hear the sounds of the battle growing fainter. He hoped that Tiber and the others were still alive. They reached the location Lyra had indicated, a desolate patch of land covered in rocks and scrub brush. There was no sign of any facility, any entrance, any technology. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Ethan asked. "I'm sure," Lyra said. "The keystone is resonating with something beneath the surface." She held the keystone out in front of her, pointing it towards the ground. The keystone began to glow even brighter, emitting a beam of light that illuminated a small patch of rock. Ethan knelt down and examined the rock. He could see a faint outline, a barely visible seam that ran across its surface. He took out his knife and began to pry at the rock, carefully chipping away at the edges. After several minutes of hard work, he managed to dislodge the rock, revealing a small opening beneath. The opening was dark and narrow, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. "This is it," Ethan said. "This is the entrance." He looked at Lyra, his eyes filled with determination. "Are you ready?" Lyra nodded, her face pale but resolute. "I'm ready," she said. Ethan squeezed through the opening, disappearing into the darkness. Lyra followed close behind. They found themselves in a narrow tunnel, the walls damp and cold. The tunnel sloped downwards, leading them deeper into the earth. The air was thick and stale, filled with the scent of dust and decay. They walked for what seemed like hours, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Finally, they reached a large chamber, the walls lined with strange devices and glowing panels. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice filled with awe. "The ancient facility." She approached one of the panels and placed the keystone into a small slot. The panel began to glow, emitting a series of beeps and whistles. Suddenly, the entire chamber came to life. Lights flickered on, illuminating the room with a soft, ethereal glow. Machines whirred and hummed, filling the air with a sense of ancient power. "What's happening?" Ethan asked. "The keystone is activating the facility," Lyra said. "It's unlocking the ancient technologies." She began to work at the panel, typing in a series of commands. The machines around them responded, whirring and clicking as they came online. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. "I'm activating the planetary defense system," Lyra said. "It's a network of powerful weapons that can protect this planet from attack." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "You mean there are weapons hidden on this planet?" Yes, Lyra said. The ancient civilization that built this facility foresaw the possibility of invasion. They created a defense system to protect themselves. She continued to work at the panel, her fingers flying across the keys. Finally, she pressed a large, red button. It's done, she said. The defense system is active. Suddenly, the ground began to shake. The chamber trembled, the walls vibrating with power. What's going on? Ethan asked, his voice filled with alarm. The system is calibrating, Lyra said. It's preparing to fire. They rushed out of the chamber and back through the tunnel, scrambling to escape before the facility collapsed. As they emerged from the opening, they could see a beam of light shooting into the sky, piercing the darkness. The beam grew brighter and brighter, until it filled the entire sky with its blinding light. Then, the beam split into multiple beams, each one targeting a different location in the atmosphere. The beams began to fire, blasting apart the clouds, destroying any object that dared to enter their path. Ethan watched in awe as the planetary defense system unleashed its power. He could see Jax's ship approaching in the distance, but it was no match for the ancient technology. The ship was struck by one of the beams and instantly vaporized, disappearing in a flash of light. The battle was over. The planetary defense system continued to fire, protecting the planet from any further attacks. Ethan and Lyra stood together, watching as the sky was cleansed of all threats. The farmers and miners emerged from the woods, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. They had survived. They had defeated Jax. They had saved their homes. Tiber approached them, his face etched with pride. You did it, Ethan, he said. You saved us all. Ethan smiled. He had never thought of himself as a hero, but he knew that he had done something important. He had stood up for what he believed in. He had protected his community. And he had helped Lyra take the first step towards reclaiming her throne. But he knew that this was just the beginning.